So this week's Parsha is Parshas Yisroel, Jethro. And obviously the big event in this week's Parsha is Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah on Har Sinai. Now there is so much we could talk about. One of the big things that really has to be a part of this conversation is the obvious question that what's the big hoo-ha about what happened on Sinai? Hashem gave us the Torah. We came to Mount Sinai. Hashem gave us the Torah. Okay, great. Yaakov, his children were already studying Torah. They built yeshivas to study Torah in Egypt. Avram and Yitzchak were studying Torah before. They were keeping mitzvahs before. The Midrash, the Gemara makes this very clear. So Hashem gave us the Torah. It basically, and this is actually the case, it was more or less a formality. You know what? No. I said, and this is actually the case. I wouldn't say formality is probably not technically correct. That's what it seems like. It seems like it's just a formality. I would say that what it is maybe, let's say, a ceremony of sorts, a celebration, a big dramatic event, and there was thunder and lightning, and they heard the lightning, and they saw sound, and however that works and whatever that means. So it was a big dramatic event. Was it just about the ceremony? Was it just about our experience, or did something actually happen? And the answer is absolutely something happened, something enormous happened. Something enormous changed. So what was it that changed? Because we were studying Torah before, or we were studying Torah after. We were doing mitzvahs before, we were doing mitzvahs after. So if we were already studying the Torah, we were already doing mitzvahs, what change occurred in this event of Hashem giving the Torah to us? And whilst on one hand, at the very practical action level, the behavioral level, not necessarily a whole lot changed. We were studying before and after. We were doing mitzvahs before and after. In truth, everything changed completely. And so the Midrash talks about this, and it gives a metaphor. And the metaphor that it gives for what happened at the giving of Torah, what happened at Mount Sinai, what was the thing that changed? Which obviously is the whole point of this event. So the metaphor that's given in Midrash is, it says, Mashal Mahadavar Domer, a metaphor. What is this similar to? What would be comparable to this as a metaphor, as a parable? A situation in which a king makes a decree that there are two cities, and he says the residents of one city can't travel to the second city, and the residents of the second city can't travel to the first city. Residents of each city have to stay in their city, and there's no travel back and forth between them. And what that is a metaphor for, or analogy for, is the fact that it was a technical impossibility for there to be interaction between physical and spiritual. Especially if, and some of you may have noticed this in the past, very often instead of saying spiritual, I'll say non-physical. Right? Because spiritual is like, well, what does that mean exactly? The word spiritual can mean a lot of different things. People might have a very spiritual experience, when taking, DMT or whatever it is. People will use the word spiritual. And while I think it's very possible that there is a truly technically spiritual component to it, largely you don't have to go to actual spirituality or what in Chassidus, in Kabbalah, we think of or we refer to as spirituality to get there, because it's actually completely explicable very physically and materially, and that is that you ingest or inhale or whatever it is, some sort of substance that is psychoactive. It interacts with receptors in your brain that alter your perception. And then you have this experience that feels spiritual in nature, But it's an entirely physical process, and we can map out every single step of the process. We know what the chemicals are. We know what cells they're interacting with. We know what the receptors look like that we're interacting with. We know what the downstream reactions are as a result of these psychoactive substances interacting with the brain cells. So it's actually a completely physical, tangible thing that can be tracked back to molecules, and we know exactly what's happening. It's not actually spiritual. It can be a spiritual feeling experience, but it is a physical process. And when we use the word spiritual in Chassidus, in Kabbalah, generally what we're referring to is other layers of reality that are not physical. Physical and spiritual are mutually exclusive. That which is physical is not spiritual. If we're using the word spiritual in that context, and that's the reason why I often will tend to avoid using that word, or try to avoid using that word, because it means so many different things. Now, if we replace spiritual with non-physical, then it becomes redundant to say that physical and non-physical are mutually exclusive, because something that is physical is obviously not non-physical, and something that's non-physical is obviously not physical. So there are, let's say there's the universe that we know, which is physical, it's material, it's tangible, it's made out of physical mass. That physical matter carries physical energy, calories. And there are additional layers of reality that are equivalent, but they're not physical. The matter that they are comprised of is a non-physical equivalent to physical matter. The energy that is carried in those layers of reality is a non-physical equivalent to the physical energy that's carried in this universe that is contained within mass, within matter. Now, the physical, right? Why can't we see angels? The reason we can't see angels is not because they're invisible. The reason we can't see air is because it's invisible. I think it's been a while since I've done this practice. Everyone raise your hand. If you haven't done this before, at least with me, raise your hand. Wave it back and forth. Do you feel something on your hand? Yeah, that's air, right? Just interestingly, where this comes from is years ago, and I think it was probably my oldest child. And when she was like probably 3 or 4 years old, I was trying to explain to her what air is and that there's air all around us. You know, and try to explain that to a kid, like at that age. And she happens to be incredibly brilliant and sharp. So, and I had this idea, it just came to me. So I told her, hold up your hand, wave it back and forth. Do you feel something? Yeah, what you feel is the air. There is actual substance occupying this space. And when you move your hand, you can feel it. You can feel the air brushing against your hand. You can feel it impacting your hand. You can't see the air because it's invisible. The reason we can't see angels is not because they're invisible, it's because they don't physically exist. If I ask you, do angels exist? And you say no, you might be right, depending on what you mean. If what you mean is they do not exist physically, they're not made out of physical mass and they don't carry physical energy, then yes, that's true. They don't physically exist. They are not physical phenomena. They are non-physical phenomena. Now, we don't perceive, see, hear, feel, taste, smell the non-physical. It's hard for us to even relate to it in a way that's at all tangible. But we can understand and accept that it is real. It is as real as the physical. And for those non-physical entities that exist in alternative, I don't think is the right word, but in non-physical layers of reality, to them, the physical is as distant and abstract as the non-physical is to us. So physical and non-physical are separate layers of reality, and the parameters that define their existence are different. The physical and the non-physical cannot naturally interact. And this is the reason why we say in the bracha Asher Yotzar, that we say in the morning blessings and we say it after using the restroom, thanking Hashem for our health. One of the way that bracha, that blessing closes, we say Baruch Atah Hashem, Blessed are you, Hashem, Rofei Chol Basar, who heals all flesh, or Mafli La'asos, and does wonders. Now, the simplest layer of meaning of that expression that Hashem does wonders is very simple. It's biology. The deeper you get into biology, the more unfathomable the exquisite complexity and perfection becomes, because it's completely absurd. The effectively infinite number of things that are happening in perfect balance, just for life to exist in a single cell, let alone an organism with trillions of cells in it, all to be working. If someone's not well, that's not like a wonder. The wonder is that life could even exist, let alone for such a complex, multicellular, multi-system organism to be able to be alive and healthy. It's insane. So that is the wonders. Hashem does wonders in just sustaining life and biology. There's a deeper layer of that as well, which is that Hashem does wonders, which is perhaps a euphemism for miracles, in uniting the body and the soul. Because every single one of us is a body plus a soul. Every human being is a human body plus a human soul. Human body plus human soul equals human being. Now, a body and a soul shouldn't be able to work together because the soul is not physical. You can tell very quickly the difference between, or the level of the complexity and depth of someone's thought. Someone who is, let's say, in the agnostic and or atheist category. And I encountered this, I remember back in the Facebook days, used to encounter this a lot. You would have people who would say science can prove that science has proven that God doesn't exist. And I mean, that's obviously not the case. But that's not a criticism of science. That's a criticism of the person who's saying that, who doesn't understand, obviously, very much about science. Now, if someone says to me, you cannot scientifically prove the existence of God, yeah, fair. Because God's not physical, and science is the pursuit of physical knowledge and the understanding of physical reality. So yeah, science can neither prove nor disprove God. Some people, as they get deeper and deeper into science, they become more skeptical of spirituality. Some people, the deeper they get into science, the more convinced they become of the truth of spirituality. But it's not within the purview of science to prove or disprove God. So if someone will come along and say, you cannot scientifically prove the existence of God, okay, fair. If someone says, science has proven that God doesn't exist, it's probably not investing too deeply, probably not worth investing too deeply in that conversation. If you're going to be coming from a disagreement or argumentative perspective, if you're going to be coming from a sharing perspective, it's always worth it. So physical and non-physical can't interact naturally, because the physical doesn't exist in the non-physical layer of reality, and the non-physical doesn't physically exist. How are they supposed to interact if the parameters that define the nature of the universe and existence are different and mutually exclusive? So that's what we say, Mafli Lasos, Hashem does wonders in bringing the human body and the human soul together into a composite entity, even though that is naturally a technical impossibility. It's technically impossible according to the laws of physics, the nature of the physical reality. It's technically impossible according to the laws that define the nature of the non-physical layer of reality. Yet, Hashem brings them together. And so a similar thing happened when Hashem gave the Torah. Before the Torah was given, they studied Torah, they did mitzvahs. And when they studied Torah and did mitzvahs, they produced all of these spiritual outcomes. But those spiritual outcomes did not land in this world. They did not have an impact. You could take a book, you could write verses from the Torah, you could study those verses from the book, throw it in the garbage, step on it. It's just paper. Paper cannot be godly. It cannot be divine. It's a physical object. And you actually could have done that at that point before Hashem gave the Torah. Well, why not? It's just paper. It's molecules of paper and some ink. Why can't they go in the garbage? When Hashem gave us the Torah, right, up until that point, because of, let's say, this spiritual attunement of our ancestors, of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, etc., they were able to actually be in touch with the Torah directly and able to study it and to understand and to know how we're supposed to behave and live our lives and to behave and live their lives that way. But that was something they were doing on their own. The thing that happened at Sinai was Matan Torah. Hashem gave us the Torah. The moment Hashem gave us the Torah, it's a whole different ballgame. It's not us doing something. It's us doing something Hashem has instructed us to do. It's us in partnership with Hashem. This is Hashem's instruction that He gave us, and we are the front end of that. Hashem is the back end of that. So everything that we do now, we are executing on Hashem's instruction. It's a whole different thing. And so the Midrash says, when Hashem came to Har Sinai to give us the Torah, in the metaphor, it's like the king annulling the decree and saying the residents of the two cities can now travel back and forth between the two cities. No more issues with traveling back and forth. And so the Midrash says, and that is an analogy for the fact that when Hashem gave us the Torah on Mount Sinai, what He did was say that from now on, even though physical and non-physical are obviously, by virtue of those names, mutually exclusive, and the physical is not going to be able to interact with the non-physical because it doesn't physically exist, and vice versa. But now Hashem has come, given us the Torah, and so now Hashem, why can't the physical and the non-physical interact? Because there are laws, there are parameters that define the existence of the physical, there are parameters that define the existence of the non-physical. And those parameters define them as existing mutually exclusively to each other. So within the experience of one, the other one does not materially exist. Hashem is the one who created those parameters. Hashem is the one who created the laws of physics and the laws that define the nature of the spiritual, the non-physical. Hashem is not bound by those laws. Hashem wrote the code for those laws. If Hashem wrote the code for those laws, He could change them if He feels like it. He wrote the code. He's the creator of those laws. He's the creator of the fact that they can't interact. So the inability to interact is something that exists at Hashem's whim. When Hashem gives us the Torah, Hashem now says, it's true that the physical and the non-physical are mutually exclusive by virtue of their natures. I, the creator of those natures, am now giving you the Torah, partnering with you, and now everything you learn, every word of Torah that you study, every mitzvah you do, every time you light Shabbos candles, you put on tefillin, you give charity, you help someone out, whatever it is, your action is the front end of my partnership with you, and we are partners in that action, which means we are now able to bring the physical and the spiritual together. Now, when we use something for a mitzvah, the physical molecules, the physical matter actually gets uplifted and becomes divine. But that's a technical impossibility. When Hashem gave us the Torah, we are now doing the Torah on Hashem's terms. We are now the front end and Hashem is the back end of this same thing. It's a partnership with Hashem's partnership. The impossible is as possible as the possible because Hashem's the creator of possible and impossible. Hashem's the creator of the concept of possibility and impossibility. So that's what happened. Everything changed. And as great as our ancestors were, the forefathers, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, etc., as amazing as they were and as great as their sacrifice was and their dedication and their commitment, etc., in terms of the impact on integrating infinity of the Creator into the physical world, one mitzvah that we do outweighs everything that they all did combined, because it was technically impossible for them to integrate divinity into the physical, because divinity doesn't physically exist, so it just wasn't possible. And now we could be simple and not have any intentions or any of that spiritual attunement or anything, but Hashem said, do a mitzvah, we do the mitzvah, boom, integrate the divinity, godliness into the physical, just like that. And this idea that the Torah is a union of the, let's say, the tangible and the intangible, the material and the divine, is actually expressed within the 10 commandments that were given on Mount Sinai. Technically not commandments. Commandments is not the right word. There are 613 commandments, because commandments is mitzvahs. There are Aseres Hadibros, which is 10 utterances maybe, 10 speakings, probably most technically correct. But they are what are universally referred to as the 10 commandments. If we look at the nature of these 10, and they are commandments at the end of the day, that's just not what they're known as or what they're called. If we look at these 10 commandments, they start off with belief in God. I am Hashem your God. Do not believe in any other gods. And then on the other end, we have don't murder, don't kidnap. And it's like, really? This is like one set of things, especially when we give some thought to, and we understand the nature of the mitzvah, the commandment to believe in God and not to have any other gods. Right? Who is this commandment talking to? Believe in Hashem. Who is the market for this mitzvah? Anyone who's listening, by definition, necessarily already believes that God exists, or they're not listening to God's commandments. So they don't need to be commanded to believe in God, because they already do, otherwise they wouldn't be listening. And the person who doesn't believe that God exists isn't listening to God's commandments because they don't believe that God exists. So who is this talking to? Is it talking to the person who already believes in God and therefore doesn't need to be commanded to believe in God? Or is it speaking to the person who doesn't believe in God and therefore is absolutely not going to listen? The commandment to believe in Hashem, the first, most fundamental commandment, believe in Hashem. Who's it speaking to? Is it a formality? It's not a formality. We don't do formalities in truth. If even something that appears or might be commonly described as a formality has substance and real meaning to it, which is exactly what we're talking about, right? What might seem like a formality, this ceremony of giving the Torah, it was a very big, real thing. So what's this commandment, thou shalt believe in God? Well, it's not talking, obviously, to the person who doesn't believe in God because they're not listening. So if it's speaking to the person who does believe in God, what's it saying? Because they already do believe. Right? The question is, what is the instruction here? What is God telling us to do? And the answer is, God is instructing us to not just believe academically in our heads that God exists. Right? There are many people who have understood, historically, there have been many prominent figures who have understood, great philosophers who, the moment someone accidentally got into their private space, what they saw was completely at odds with the philosophy that this person was espousing. And the fact is, that doesn't necessarily mean that person cannot be an effective educator about the philosophy. It just means that for them, the philosophy is all in their head. The commandment is that belief in God that you have in your head, bring it down so that you believe in your body. So that your natural reactions to things, your natural response, your natural perception of things is one that is colored by your belief in God. Your disposition towards things is colored by your belief in God. The way that you show up is colored by your belief in God. The commandment is not to believe in God in your head, because a person can believe in God in their head and I mean, there's this idea that's talked about in Gemara and the Talmud. It references it says Ganva apum machtat rachmonakaya. In Aramaic, that means a thief. Apum machtata means at the opening of the tunnel, right? A thief who just tunneled under someone's house and they're about to break in their house so they can rob this house blind and take all the valuables. They're about to break in. They're at the opening of the tunnel, about to go and steal, and they say, Hashem, please help me succeed in stealing. It's like, hang on, what? Now, yes, we understand that they could believe that God exists and not care, but if your belief in God is real enough that you're actually asking God to help you, what about the fact that God literally said, do not steal? So you believe in God enough to ask God to help you succeed in something that God literally said, don't do this. There's clearly some dissonance here. And the answer is, yeah, there is dissonance. Why? Because the belief is up here in the head. It's not down here. If that person had fulfilled the commandment of thou shalt believe in God, in parentheses or in brackets maybe, in your body, not just in your head, they wouldn't be stealing. They'd be much less likely to steal, on average, right? Because maybe there are circumstances where it might be the moral thing to steal. That's a whole, at least arguably, separate conversation. We don't have time for that right now. But the commandment is to believe in God in your body and with such complexity and depth that ultimately, and this is what we're working towards, when you look around, you see God in everything. You look at an object, you look at a desk, and you see a desk that exists because God's making it exist. This moment in time exists because God's making it exist. It has a purpose, it has meaning, it is divine. And then the second commandment, which is not to have any other gods, again, it's not just saying, oh, don't go and bow down to an idol. It includes that also, but it's a lot more than that. And that is for all of us to not lose focus and clarity on the fact that everything comes from Hashem. There is nothing that contributes towards our outcomes and our experience other than Hashem. And the moment we put energy into something other than Hashem, because we believe that it's going to be our salvation, that is subtly a form of idolatry. It doesn't mean we're not supposed to be responsible. We're supposed to be responsible. We're supposed to be practical because Hashem tells us to. But not because being responsible and practical is going to produce the outcome. Hashem produces the outcome. We have an obligation or responsibility to behave responsibly and practically.
What would the outcome be?
It could be anything. It could be financial security, stability, safety, love, connection, whatever. Right? So fulfilling these two mitzvahs properly, of having a thoroughly and complexly developed belief in Hashem that exists in every fiber of our being, in our bodies, in our cells, in our nerves, in our organs, not just in our minds academically. And it is such that to us, everything is about God. Everything is about Hashem. And there is nothing that we are going to chase in place of believing in Hashem. That doesn't mean serving an idol. It means not running to work on a business deal because it's going to give us financial security or take us a step in that direction. Again, it doesn't mean we don't go chase the deal. But if a person's in a situation where this is what they do and it's their responsibility to go chase the deal, go chase the deal. That's what you're supposed to do. But not because it's going to give you something, because Hashem's going to give it to you. You just have to chase the deal. Now, this is what the Ten Commandments open up with. Extremely deep, complex work. And we could spend our whole lives working on this. Now, think about the person that these verses, these first commandments are speaking to, and the place that a person is in when they're hearing that, and the place a person's in when they're working on that, a place a person's in when they've been working on that. And then, don't murder. Don't kidnap. It seems like they should be in different places. Like maybe there's one crowd that we talk to about, believe in God and with all the things that it means, and don't serve anything other than God, don't believe in anything other than God, any forces other than God in your life. And then there's the crowd that were like, guys, please, don't murder anyone, don't kidnap, be nice, be basic, decent human beings, try to survive together so we don't descend into chaos and madness. But they are together, and the reason they're together is because this is the whole message of the giving of the Torah. There are different people who are at different places in their life, but what we are working on is the same one thing. Right? And the Medrash says, in this metaphor, or in explaining the metaphor, the analogy, it says, imagine there's a king who says the residents of Syria can't go to Rome and the residents of Rome can't go to Syria. Those are the names of the cities in the Medrash. And then the king nullifies the decree and says that the residents of Rome can go to Syria, the residents of Syria can go to Rome. So too, there's a verse that says, Hashamayim shamayim la'Hashem ha'aretz nosam livnei adam. The heavens are for God, and earth was given to us, to mankind. And the Medrash says that verse was the decree. Spiritual, physical, or physical, non-physical. The physical is the domain of people, the non-physical is the domain of divinity. That's the way it was until the event of the giving of the Torah on Har Sinai that's talked about in this week's Parsha. And the Medrash says, in that moment, Hashem said, Tachtonim ya'alu le'elyonim, that which is below can ascend to that which is above, and that which is above can descend to that which is below, i.e. the material and the spiritual can combine and interact. And it says, and Hashem says, Vani amaschil, and I will start the process of coming down, as the verse says, and Hashem descended upon Mount Sinai. Hashem's non-physical presence descended upon this physical place, beginning the process of the interaction between the physical and the spiritual, or the physical and the non-physical. That which is above will descend to interact with that which is below, and that which is below will ascend to interact with that which is above. These are two parts, or if we talk about it more generally, if we zoom out, all the different parts of the picture become one with each other. It doesn't mean they lose their specificity and their individuality, but it means they blend together into one collective, which is a composite of those individual pieces. And what that speaks to within the Aseret HaDibros, those 10 Commandments, is that which is above, this complex, profoundly life-changing belief and faith in God that we have and we integrate into our bodies, to the point that we don't pursue or concern ourselves with anything other than God in terms of trying to achieve outcomes. God is the only factor in contributing towards our outcomes, and we don't pursue anything else, which is these first two commandments. The person who's there, Elyonim, Yerdu Latachtonim, for that person, let's say that in general, a person who's doing this work for real is not likely to commit murder. Like Lo Sirtzach, which a lot of people say don't kill, it doesn't mean don't kill. There's a time and a place when killing is the correct thing to do, even the obligatory thing to do. Lo Sirtzach means do not commit murder. A person who is in that place, if it's real, is most likely not at a very high risk of committing murder. They're probably not at very high risk of kidnapping someone or being jealous of someone else's material possessions. That being said, a person can, right, there are people who are, nice guys, very nice people, not because they have a strong set of morals and values by which they shape their lives. They're just naturally nice people. They wouldn't know how to not be nice if you paid them. So when that person doesn't commit murder, they're not murdering in the pursuit of serving the Creator. They're not murdering because they don't really have an interest in murdering. And hopefully that's all of us, at least to that extreme degree. That being said, the person who is actively working on their faith, so it's not just academic, but it's something they feel and something that they're working on integrating into their body, and they feel it, and it colors their perception, and it colors their experience, and it colors their emotions, and it colors their behavior. If they're really bringing that down and integrating it, then when they think about not murdering, even if they are someone who is maybe naturally horrified by the thought, if they're really integrating this faith all the way down, it's going to bleed into that too, and they're going to see it as something that God says I shouldn't do, and therefore I'm not doing it. That's El Yodim Yerdu L'Tachtonim. A person who maybe by either nature of, their true nature, their biological nature, or their experiential nature, the blend of the two, which is ultimately what everything is, the nature and the nurture, their genes and their experiences. The person who, as far as those things are concerned, would never think about murdering or kidnapping, etc., can still have a process of committing to not murder and to not kidnap because Hashem says so. Even though they wouldn't do it anyway. But the El Yodim Yerdu L'Tachtonim, once the person works on that purpose and really internalizes it and integrates it and brings it into their body, then even those things are going to be connected to that sense of purpose and meaning. Serving the Creator, belief in God, etc. And Tachtonim Ya'alu Le'Elyonim, that which is below will ascend to that which is above. Even the person who, is a bit of a loose cannon, very hot-headed, the person who's maybe, by virtue of their nature and their nurture, etc., extremely aggressive, has a tendency towards violence, very reactive, etc., and that person says, you know what, I'm going to work really hard on not murdering anyone because the Torah says so. I'm going to work really hard on not kidnapping because the Torah says so. Generally, when we picture someone who is just going to be naturally inclined to murder, we probably don't think of someone who's likely to say, I'm not going to do it because Hashem said so, but could be. There could be a person who believes in Hashem and wants to do the right thing, and they just have a very aggressive and violent nature. There are people who are very aggressive and violent by nature who don't want to be, and they work on it. That's a real thing. So even the person who is working on not murdering, the person who's working on not kidnapping, when Hashem gave the Torah to us, He placed Himself inside that commandment. So when that person who actually is in a position where they could go and murder someone, they could go and kidnap someone, and they don't because Hashem said so, they are on the front end of something that Hashem is on the back end of. They are in partnership with Hashem, and the connection to Hashem that results, the connection to their true selves that results, can elevate them to a place where now they can even reach this faith, this belief in Hashem that can come all the way down into their bodies. Why? Because this is what the giving of the Torah is about. It's about bringing at the first level at which we discussed it, the literally physical and non-physical together, that which is, let's say, less spiritually attuned and that which is more spiritually attuned. And that means that it can, when Hashem gave the Torah, that made it possible for the person who is less spiritually attuned to reach a place of spiritual attunement that doesn't seem like it makes natural sense for a person in their state. And maybe naturally it doesn't make sense. But because Hashem gave us the Torah and partnered with us in the Torah and placed Himself on the back end of every mitzvah that we do, when that person works on just trying not to murder someone, the connection that they form with Hashem through that mitzvah now puts them in a place to be able to do all the things. And if we look at the first three words of the Aseret HaDibros, of the Ten Commandments, right, they start off, okay, I'm writing Anochi Hashem Lekech on the board. I have to get rid of Eagles win, sorry. I just got nothing against it, but it just doesn't feel right to be putting them up here together. Anochi Hashem. No way to write that. Whatever. Elokecha. Usually translated as I am Hashem your God. Right, we talked about the names Yud Kei Vav Kei and Elokim somewhat recently, I think, right? So Hashem here, this is in the Torah, is the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. Yud Kei Vav Kei has the words HaYehovah V'yeh, past, present, future, because this name refers to Hashem almost, let's say, on Hashem's terms. Not Hashem as Hashem is showing up in creator mode, but Hashem as Hashem is. In the absolute infinity of Hashem, the past, the present, and the future do all just coexist. Because Hashem is the origin of time. Hashem is the origin of every point in time. So every point in time coexists together within Hashem. So within Hashem, past, present, future all coexist. Same with every point in space, etc. And then Elokim is a name that refers to a mode of being, let's say, of Hashem, this creator mode, where Hashem is calculating, limiting, restricting, reducing, to create things that are limited and defined, and Hashem operating in that mode brings reality as we know it into being, which is very calculated and defined and limited, etc. And that's why if you read through the account of creation in the Torah, it says, Bereshis bara Elokim. Elokim created. And if you look at every statement of an act of creation, it says Elokim, Elokim. It never says Yud Kei Vav Kei. Because creation doesn't come directly from Hashem in Yud Kei Vav Kei mode. Because if it came from Yud Kei Vav Kei mode, then time, past, present, and future would all be synonymous, and that wouldn't be the way that Hashem wanted it to be. So every act of creation comes from Hashem in creator mode, Elokim, limiting, calculating, designing, restricting, etc. mode, as opposed to Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is non-creator mode. It's just God as God is. But even that, Yud Kei Vav Kei is still a name, which means it still refers to a mode of being. What's Anochi? Anochi means I. No names. No modes of being. No doing, no showing up. Just the entity itself. Who gave us the Torah at Har Sinai? Hashem. In what mode of being was Hashem operating when He gave us the Torah? And the answer is He wasn't. It wasn't Yud Kei Vav Kei. It wasn't Elokim. It was Anochi. Hashem says, I. And relative to I, to Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Elokim, they're all the same. One is that which brings time and space into being, which limits, which calculates, which reduces. Yud Kei Vav Kei is the infinite origin of all of those things where time and space exist synonymously. Both of those are just modes of being of the I of Hashem Himself, beyond names. Anochi, and that's why it starts with Anochi I. And when it comes from I, when it comes from Hashem, from the source of Yud Kei Vav Kei and the source of Elokim, I, Hashem Himself, is the source of both of those things, then Hashem can allow those two to interact. Hashem can allow us to go through Elokim, through nature, through being natural human beings, living in a natural world, through that to access Yud Kei Vav Kei, to access the infinite, to access the source of existence where past, present, and future all coexist as one. Because the parameters that separate, that define Yud Kei Vav Kei and Elokim as being different, both come from Hashem Himself, I. So the Torah was given to us not by Yud Kei Vav Kei, not by Hashem in Yud Kei Vav Kei mode, not by Hashem in Elokim mode. Hashem, period. I. And so because it's coming from Hashem Himself, undefined by names or anything else, not in any behavioral mode, that I, the Anochi, can allow the Yud Kei Vav Kei and the Elokim, the supernatural and the natural, to come together, which means that us, through not murdering, we can connect to that faith that you would not think, you wouldn't think naturally that these two things can be relevant to the same person at the same time. The person who's, working on the commandment of believing Hashem as we're describing it is not a person who's in a situation to murder. And a person who's in a situation where they actually have to actively work on not murdering, they're not there, naturally. But because Hashem Anochi, the source of both Hashem Elokecha, is giving us the Torah that allows us to go through nature and to access that which is beyond nature. It allows the person who's not murdering because Hashem said to not murder, Tachtonim Ya'alu Le'Elyonim, to ascend to that which is above and to connect to who they truly are, because by doing that they're connecting to Hashem, the Hashem beyond names, the Creator, period, not in any behavioral mode, not with any names. Anochi, Hashem says I. The person who doesn't murder, the person who doesn't kidnap because Hashem said so, because Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I, Hashem your God, said to do this. So Anochi is beyond Hashem and Elokecha, is beyond faith, and is beyond not murdering, and therefore can allow all of those things to connect into each other. And for those who are in a place of working on that level of faith, to bring that all the way down into the fact that they're not murdering and not kidnapping, even though they wouldn't have been doing it anyways. And for the person who's actively working on not murdering and not kidnapping, to be able to connect because they're plugging into the truth of Hashem. They can plug into the truth of who they are, and they can plug into this faith and all of these other things that it doesn't rationally make sense for them to be in any sort of position to be in touch with. Have a good week.